Hello and welcome to Elemental Hardware Enrichment. My name is Aiden and today we're going to be building finger basketball. Before we get started with building, let's go ahead and introduce the supplies that we're going to need for this project. For finger basketball, we're going to need a damp rag, some wood glue, a hardware tray, some sandpaper, a hammer block, and our safety glasses. Let's go ahead and put those on now. Now that we've introduced all of our supplies, let's talk about the tools that we're going to need. So for finger basketball, we're going to need a hammer and a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver. All right, we've introduced all of our supplies and tools, so the next step will be to talk about our parts. Let's go ahead and talk about our wood parts. The first part I have here is this piece, and this is going to be our post. You'll notice that one side of the post has these 2 pre-drilled holes. Next we have our wedge. This wedge has 1 hole in the center and 2 countersunk holes on either side. Next we have our hoop and backboard, and you'll notice 2 countersunk holes above the hoop. The last wood part is going to be our largest, and it's going to be our court. You'll notice a through hole on one side, a hole close to the center, and then 2 screw holes here on the opposite end. Now that we've introduced all of our wood parts, the next step will be to talk about our hardware. Let's go ahead and talk about our hardware. I have my hardware bag right here. I'm going to go ahead and open it up and talk about the different components inside. The first thing I'm going to take out is this ball on a string. Next I have my acrylic launcher. Next I have my blue dot bag. Inside this blue dot bag there are a number of different hardware components, so let's talk about them. I have my cord lock. I have my screw eye. I have a 1/2 inch wood screw. And then I have 2 3/4 inch wood screws. Now that I've got everything out of the blue dot bag, I can get it out of my way. The last thing that's going to be in my hardware bag is this bag here with a red dot. Inside this red dot bag, we'll open it up. And we'll have 2 3/4 inch machine screws, and 2 hex nuts. All right, we can go ahead and get our bag out of our way. Now that we've introduced all of our hardware parts, we're ready to move on to the next step, which will be to sand our wood parts. Let's go ahead and get started sanding. So I have my hammer block right here and my sandpaper as well. I'm going to turn the sandpaper over so that the soft side faces up and place the hammer block across it like this. I'm then going to fold the edges of the sandpaper over the block to form a sanding block. Once I've got that set up, I can go ahead and start sanding my wood parts. The first part I'm going to focus on is the court, and I'm going to start by focusing on the end grain edge of the court. That's going to be the edge with these lines or layers running through it. That's usually going to be the roughest edges of the piece, so let's go ahead and start there and start sanding. Now that I've thoroughly sanded all around the end grain edge of my part, I'm going to go ahead and quickly sand the top and bottom edge, which is known as the veneered edge. Once I've finished this piece, I can move it off to the side and begin sanding my remaining wood pieces. When I get to my post, I'm going to lightly sand around the outside rounded edge of the post. The next thing we're going to do is bevel one side of the post. So if you take a look at the post, you'll notice that this side has 2 pre-drilled holes. That's going to end up being the top of our post. So the opposite edge is going to be the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and bevel the bottom of the post with my sandpaper. The way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to hold the post straight up and down. I'm going to place the sandpaper against the bottom edge at about a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to run the sandpaper back and forth against the edge as I rotate the post in my hand to make sure that I'm evenly beveling it all the way around. And I'm going to go ahead and do this for about 10 to 15 seconds all the way around the piece. Once I've finished, I should have a nice evenly beveled edge all the way around the bottom of the post, which will make it easier to set the post into the court later on. Now that I've finished sanding all of my wood parts, the next step will be to wipe up any excess dust using my rag. Once you've got your parts cleaned up, go ahead and wipe off your work surface as well. Alright, we've got all of our pieces sanded and cleaned up, so now we're ready to get started with our build. Let's go ahead and get started with our build. The first step will be to attach our post to our court. So I'm going to need the court and the post. Now if you take a look at your court, you'll notice that one side has a rounded edge. And it's very important that that side faces up because that's going to be the side with these pre-drilled holes for our screws later on. So I'm going to go ahead and place the court onto my work surface, making sure that that rounded edge faces up. Next, I'm going to go ahead and attach my post. Now, if you remember earlier, I pointed out that these two holes are at the top of the post and the other side is the bottom. That's the side that we beveled earlier to make this step a little bit easier. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is open up my glue. I'm going to just put this red cap in the tray so I don't lose it. And I'm going to spread some glue around the beveled edge of my post. I'm not putting glue directly on the top or bottom flat edge because that's not going to make contact. Instead, I'm placing it around this rounded edge and then spreading it evenly with my finger. Once I've got the glue spread out, I can clean my finger off and I can begin to align my post over the hole in the court. Now, the orientation of this piece is very important. So let's take a moment now to double check that we have these two holes at the top pointing straight forward. If these are not straight, then when we attach our hoop later on, it's going to be crooked. So go ahead and take a moment now to double check that these two holes face straight forward before we hammer this in. Once you're happy with the placement, go ahead and hold that dowel in place and we can tap it down until it's flush with the bottom. Once you've got it in there, go ahead and double check that it's flush with the bottom edge of the court. If you're happy with the placement of your hoop, go ahead and grab your rag and wipe up any excess glue. Alright, and just like that, we have the post attached to our court, and we're ready to move on to our next step, which will be to attach the hoop. Let's go ahead and get started attaching our hoop to our post. So for this step, I'm going to need my hoop and backboard, and I'm also going to need my two 3/4 inch machine screws, as well as my two hex nuts. So I'm going to go ahead and pull those out right now. The first thing I'm going to do is hold the hoop so that the hoop section faces out and towards the opposite end of my court. I'm then going to begin to align the two holes in the backboard over the holes in the post. So I'm going to turn it this way so you can see a little bit better, and I'm just lining them up just like that. Once I've got them aligned, I'm going to go ahead and take the screws and line them up with the holes to place them through. And I'm just placing one screw into each hole with my fingers. Once I've got my screws through, I can go ahead and hold them in place and screw on the hex nuts using my fingers. Now that I've got the hex nuts as tight as I can with my fingers, I'm going to use my screwdriver to tighten them the rest of the way. So I'm going to go ahead and pinch these in place using my offhand. And as I'm holding one hex nut, I'm going to tighten the screw attached to it using my screwdriver. And I'm just going to tighten this screw until the hex nut begins to turn and pull out of my grip, and then I can move on to the next one. Now I've got both of them securely attached, and the hoop is securely attached to my post and my court. Now I'm ready to move on to my next step, which is to attach my wedge. Let's get started attaching our wedge. So for this step, I'm going to need my wedge, and I'm also going to need my two 3/4 inch wood screws. When I'm attaching the wedge, I want to make sure that this edge with the countersunk holes faces up, and that this flat edge of the wedge is more or less aligned with the back of my court. So I'm just going to go ahead and place it right now just to kind of understand how it should be oriented. Once I've got the orientation figured out, I can go ahead and lift this up and place a little bit of glue onto the bottom side. Once I've got that glue on there, I can go ahead and spread it out evenly using my finger. Next, I'm going to go ahead and place one screw into each of these pre-drilled holes. I can then use the tips of the screws to align with the pre-drilled holes in my cord. Once I've got that in place, I'm going to make sure it's straight, hold it in place, and then use my screwdriver to screw these screws down and secure the wedge. When you're finished, your screws should sit fully flush inside those countersunk holes inside the wedge. And now we're ready to move on to the next step, which will be to attach our launcher. Let's get started attaching our launcher. So I have my launcher right here, and this is an acrylic part, so we're going to want to remove this plastic covering that's protecting the acrylic. Once you've got that removed, you can go ahead and start to look at how this is going to attach to the wedge. You can see that there's a hole in the center of the wedge and a small hole on one edge of the launcher that will both line up for attachment. But before we attach this, we're going to go ahead and prep it to make sure that it's comfortable to use with our fingers. So I'm going to be using my sandpaper for this, and I'm just going to lightly run my sandpaper over the edge of the launcher on both sides to make sure it's a little bit smooth and more comfortable to use with my fingers. So I'm going to rest the sandpaper against the edge of the launcher and just run it back and forth and all the way around the launcher. Once I've done that on one side, I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing on the opposite side. Once I've sanded it, I can go ahead and run my finger against it, and I can feel that it's a lot smoother and more comfortable against my finger. I'm also noticing that there's still a little bit of plastic left on here, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that off as well. Now I've got it all prepped and ready to attach. So for this, I'm going to lay that down for just a second, and I'm going to need my 1/2-inch wood screw to attach it. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that the larger hole on the launcher is facing away from the hoop, and I'm going to line up the smaller hole in the launcher over that small hole in the center of the wedge. I'll then take my 1/2-inch wood screw and set it into place using my fingers. Once I've got it set in place, I'm going to hold the launcher and go ahead and tighten that screw down to secure it. Now you don't want to make that too tight, but you do want to make sure that the launcher isn't going to rattle. So if you hit it, you shouldn't rattle like that. So let's go ahead and tighten it down a little bit more. Once you've got it tight enough that it's going to hold its position, you should still be able to move it back and forth to adjust your shot and should get a nice twang when you hit it with your thumb. Just like that. So that's perfect. We've got our launcher attached and we're ready to move on to our next step, which will be to attach our eye screw and our ball. Let's go ahead and attach our ball and string to the cord. So for this, we're going to need our ball and string, our cord lock, and our screw eye. You'll notice that there's one remaining hole on the cord, and that's where we're going to place the screw eye. So I'm going to go ahead and place the screw eye right over that hole, and I'll just screw it in as tight as I can using my fingers. Once I've got it as tight as I can go ahead and leave it, and then I'm going to go ahead and feed one end of the string through the cord lock. So for this, I'm going to press down on this button, and you'll see that it kind of opens up these holes right here, and that will allow me to feed the string through one side. Once I've done that, I can pull it down to about the center of the string, and then feed the string through the ring on the screw eye. Once I've done that, I can go ahead and press down on the button again and feed the string through the other end of the cord lock. Once I've done that, I can pull it tight and secure it in place. So now I'm able to adjust the length of my string to adjust the difficulty of my shot. If I want to make it as easy as possible, I can go ahead and place this in the hoop and then tighten the string until it's just barely into the hoop, and that's going to be the easiest shot possible. If I want to make the shot more difficult, I can pull this down and adjust the length of the string like so. The longer the string is, the harder the shot is going to be. So now I've got this all finished and I'm ready to go get it decorated, so I'll be right back. All right, I got it all decorated and now I'm ready to challenge my friends to some finger basketball. I really hope you guys had a great time building this with me on Elemental Hardware Enrichment, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next one.